When Victoria is called to the town of Port Arboris by her mother, who just vanished 1 year prior, she is suddenly thrown into a world beyond her understanding. With the aid of the town's secret protector, the Strayer, and his magical ghost blade, Victoria attempts to uncover the family mystery her mother hid so well. Heirs of the Veil is an urban fantasy comic with horror elements, featuring a cast of queer characters struggling with taking on the responsibilities thrust upon them by an older generation. You can read the webcomic at heirsoftheveil.com.
Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday said tomorrow. So just do it! Make your dreams come true!
Hello and welcome to Screen Tones, where we talk anything and everything webcomics. Today we're going to be talking about character morality. I'm Rennie, I use she, they pronouns, and I make the webcomic Kate Blast.
And I'm Delphina, I use she, her pronouns, and I make the webcomic Somnambulous.
I'm Finn, I use they, them pronouns, and I make the webcomic Heirs of the Veil.
So, where your characters fall on a morality scale can be one of the juiciest things to play with in writing for your webcomic. There is a lot of intrigue in showing what pushes people over certain ethical lines and what might bring them back from a dark place, and how you might tie themes like redemption or forgiveness or statements about society into all of that. All kinds of delicious food to think about. So let's talk about it. So I guess start things off. I want to ask you guys, how does morality play into your work, and what kind of themes do you dig into when playing around with morality in your work?
So for Somnambulous, it's actually pretty core to a lot of things, and a lot of Sydney's arc is related directly to morality. But just in general, I feel like I've been told that I have a lot of morally good characters and morally interesting characters. So I mean, that's just, I sort of, when people talk to me about like, oh, good characters are so boring because they're perfect and stuff, I really want to bring some nuance into that, because writing good characters is actually just a little more complex than writing somebody who's perfect, which can definitely come across as flat and boring. There's a really good breakdown that I always come back to that was mentioned on the Writing Excuses podcast about 3 prongs for writing protagonists. And you have sympathy, you have proactivity, and you have competence. So if you take Somnambulous for a character like Rana, I made her very sympathetic by making other characters like her. She's friendly and nice to everybody, sometimes to an almost humorous extent, because she's also nice to machines, because she can talk to machines. And so when you see her like making a nice conversation with a coffee maker, it's like kind of like goofy. But she's not a fighter. She's kind of content to take a back seat for most things. And she listens more than she talks. She has a very gentle and passive demeanor. So even though she's sympathetic and she's competent, she's not very proactive. She's very restrained. And I think that makes her, she has a good side, but she's not doing much with it. And I think that's an interesting dynamic, especially contrasted with Sydney, who's living with a very strict anti-magic, anti-demon moral code. She considers herself very moral. Her morals are extremely important to her, and she's very proactive about imposing them on everybody and anyone she meets, which like kind of dips her back into, that's not very moral, actually. That's kind of the tip side of like, that's the flip side of her character. She thinks she's very moral, and that actually makes her a little more morally gray.
It's really interesting thinking about, because like one of the things that you hear so much in writing and comics is there are a lot of villains and antagonists that just they operate like they think that they're doing the morally right thing.
Yes.
And on the flip side, it's also interesting playing with that idea of, does the character think that they themselves are actually a good person. Because you can have a good character who thinks they're a terrible person, and you can have a terrible person who thinks they're the good guy.
Yeah. I think it also plays into like how other characters perceive them. Like in the context of your story, I don't think morality exists in a vacuum. That's morality is very subjective.
Oh, yeah.
Morality is depending on what kind of setting you have. If you're in Gotham City with Batman, he's like, the moral scale there is different than like Powerpuff Girls or whatever. Like there's just definitely a balance in genre and a balance in, what are all the other characters acting like this person is the most atrocious person in the world. And I really love coming back to Batman too, because like he's like there's so many villains, there's so many treatments of those villains, and sometimes the villains are very sympathetic, sometimes the villains are very not, but you can tell they all are coming from a place of passionately believing that what they're doing is right for the most part. They're acting within their own mindset that they are doing the moral thing that nobody else has the courage or power to do, and they are fighting against a corrupt system, but everybody has a different definition of what that corrupt system is. And that's so interesting to me. I love
Yeah.
thinking about that.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I personally think that in cases like that, the narrative and the framing of these characters within the narrative is like really key for how the reader will react to these characters and if they will see them as immoral or moral in these instances. Because I think Batman is a really great example for that, because you can have characters that basically do the exact same thing. But if we take into account how the narrative like treats these characters, we get a completely different view on them. For example, if you have like a character that steals something, and the character steals for like because they want to feed their family, and we already get like the sympathetic angle, and the reader will be more likely to like empathize and think that this is like the morally right thing to do in a corrupt system. But if it's framed slightly different, if like the reasons for stealing are like something that the audience might consider a bad reason, then the character, even though the action is kind of the same, is suddenly not moral anymore, which I always think like is kind of interesting, because it also makes you as like the writer have to take into account how different readers might like interpret what you are like putting onto the table, and how I personally like go with that in my own stories. I normally try to. I really like the approach that Delphina mentioned, that you have a character who basically thinks they are in the right, they are doing the morally right thing, and post that against like another choice or another like view on a certain thing, where you have like this power struggle where you have maybe two sides of the story, and both have like some valid ideas about what they are doing, and you kind of pit these moralities against each other, and it like might be kind of vague or be more like up to the reader's interpretation, who is actually like in the moral right and who's not, or whether or not there even is like a morally right answer to the thing.
Right, exactly. And it's funny. So I think about it like putting on like beer goggles almost. But yeah, instead of beer, it's what's your OC? What does your OC see? How does your character see the world? And you have to like really get into that headspace on when writing any character as far as morality is concerned, because sort of their lived experiences, the way that they interact with the world, the way the world treats them, all mixed together into what forms that character's moral compass. And it starts becoming less about what's right and wrong. And in a lot of situations, there's still some that are very obvious, but like there are others that get into this really murky area. And I think that the murky space is where a lot of the best stories come from.
Yeah, I personally also feel that it can be like very restricting to just work with a character by the notion of what is correct and what is incorrect in that situation, because it kind of limits you. Like, I noticed that when I was writing a certain chapter in Heirs of the Veil, that I was kinda acting on the thing, okay, this is like the right course of action to take, this is like the correct and the nice thing, but it made the story kinda boring at that point. And it also didn't feel organic for the character. So I was like, okay, Victoria is gonna do a breaking and entering because it fits to her in her situation. Is it a morally correct choice? No, but it fits the character, it fits the situation, so that was how it had to be done.
I see this a lot in tabletop universe where you're playing a character in a tabletop game and you get to a point where you're trying to make a decision and it's, you know, would I do this? Absolutely not. Would this character do this? 100%. And you have to start really considering, okay, but is this the decision that the character would make, or is this me putting my own morals on this character?
Yeah, exactly. Like, especially in tabletop, but also in webcomics, it's also sometimes nice to consider to just be like, not only what the character would do, but what would enhance the story and the drama in that moment. So it's kind of fun to play around with these like ideas and then maybe act on some of that to just enhance the story a little bit.
I hear a lot of people also like take their webcomic characters and take them into like RP and have like RP partners for them, and that's a great way to sort of get into a character's headspace and explore.
Yeah, I do that. I do that too. And it like kind of helped me to figure out a lot about certain characters, made them kind of more interesting, but also made them less probably morally upright in many cases.
Oh
Well, that's
yeah.
the interesting thing too when you're mixing and matching characters with like other people and stuff. You're all bringing something different to the table versus like a webcomic where there's one writer, there's one person who's calling all the shots, and they're the one who's deciding whether they're trying to convey a moral stance, whether they're trying to be like a cautionary tale or something like that. There's a lot of ways that you can convey your morals, but when you're working within the context of a webcomic, you're also using the setting. The setting is almost another character because you're showing here's a character, but here's what they're up against. Here's the context of them. And I think that is really important to distinguish, well, is this person a murderer, or are they a fighter who's like fighting for the right thing, and yeah, they happen to be killing, but that doesn't make them a murderer. I mean, it's all super relative.
Yeah, and it's one of the fun things that I've had fun exploring is the fact that in Cape Blast there are two worlds and cultures that I have to sort of compare morals, because then there's Earth with all its messiness and hodgepodge of different values and cultures and whatever, put up against the cat people from space, and what is their planet's morals? How is it similar? How is it different? And you can really start. I really start having some fun once I start, getting, okay, cat person is now interacting in human society. Where do the morals clash? Where do they match up? And you can get to a point where, oh, we can relate to each other on this thing, or oh, that's odd. You can play with the cult, like a little bit of culture shock there with a morality space too.
Yeah, sci-fi and fantasy is so great for that. Like, you just have so many options for introducing like non-Earth morals or not, and that helps you like kind of challenge what you've been taught too. I think you see it in Star Trek a lot. Just they come up with an alien race, and they have a completely different way of viewing things. They have a completely different system of right and wrong. And so you're trying to, in the process of saying, well, this alien race is right or wrong, you're also making a comment about humanity, like, should we be challenging these things? Is this moral? And that can be a really interesting space.
Yeah, I also think that if you have different factions where you have to like kind of not compare their morality, but their moral compasses are kind of clashing with each other, it kind of can help to like create conflicts, and the story kind of writes itself a little bit because there is something that you can work on without like actually having to think about it too deeply. But I also kind of like the aspect of just because you have this contrast between like differing factions, that you basically by contrasting them can enhance their views and their moral standards basically just because they're interacting with each other. So I really like that.
So I guess that brings us sort of into sort of our next question. And one of my favorite spaces to play around in is the classic redemption arc. How do you work with redemption and incorporate that into your work? And what makes a character redeemable or irredeemable after they've done things that might not be entirely moral?
Oh, such a good question. I think that, again, I'm going to come back to Sydney. She's a main character who starts with a very strict moral code that's at odds with pretty much what everybody that she meets. And so it doesn't make her very sympathetic. It doesn't make her very likable. But one of the things that I wanted to do to keep her interesting as a protagonist and make you want to root for her is that I ramped up her emotions to such a degree that she's not super rational about it. And she can often be provoked into doing things that are technically against the rules, against her moral code by the other characters around her. And so part of the fun of the story and her semi-redemption arc is seeing how the other characters that Sydney meets and comes to care about shift those reasons and break them down. And I think that's at the core of a lot of redemption arcs. Like you show an immoral character, they're doing bad things. Maybe they're killing or they're stealing or they're doing something that the other characters don't necessarily approve of and is not approved in their society. But once you start breaking down the reasons for why they're doing them, you start finding the touch points that are relatable. Sydney was told to fight these demon type characters because they were evil. And maybe that's not true. But the reason ultimately why she wanted to do that is because she wanted to protect something. She wanted to protect innocent people who were being abused by systems that were taking advantage of her. And that is the touch point that's relatable. Astir is, you hate this demon character. She's been magically super glued to this demon character and she hates him, and she thinks it's about using magic irresponsibly, about like being this following these rules that are heinous to her. But ultimately what she hates and what comes out is that he's dismissive of her agency, and she treats the things that are important to her as a joke. And that's relatable. We've all felt like discarded or discredited before, and we all want that level of respect. And that's how we come around to from like not so great character like morally to a more sympathetic character, because protecting things from being abused and being respected are actually pretty relatable things to want. So when you're able to erode those reasons and let characters come to an understanding with their setting, with the other characters, that's when you start getting into the process of redemption. That's when they can start making friends and they can start reaching out and understand that they were in a very limited space and they want to be better.
Yeah, I think like creating that relatability is kind of like one of the first steps to enter like a successful redemption arc, because there has to be like some understanding, like Delphina said. You have to kind of be able to grasp where the character is coming from. And I think sometimes it's kind of hard to like find a balance, especially when you have a character that is doing very immoral things and you try to like bring them onto the path of a redemption arc. It can sometimes be like hard to balance making this character relatable and understanding why they became the way that they are in the story and making up excuses for them. Because what I kind of see a lot, also especially with maybe more inexperienced writers, is that you have like this character who's like kind of edgy, who's like also pretty bad person who like murders and is an asshole and whatever, and you're still supposed to like them because they had like a very tragic backstory where, I don't know, their teddy bear got thrown into the trash by the parents.
Not the teddy bear.
Not the teddy bear, that traumatized them so much, and now they're like really like a bad person. And
What a true great origin story.
yeah. The most tragic one. But you have to kind of balance it, and you also have to do it like a little bit more gradually, because it can be really jarring when a character that was basically a villainous character before, someone of who was fighting against the main character's antagonistic, suddenly like turns around and is nice to everyone. Like, there has to be a little bit of time, the character's getting used to that, and also the character probably should kind of face the immoral actions that they've committed, like not necessarily be punished for it, because I kind of think I don't really like calls for punishment for a character if they've done something bad, because I mostly think that's not, like, in many cases it's not very interesting to go that route, but actually like have the character face what they have done and deal with that and try to be better, and then you have to actively like see that in the story. So I think that's like how a redemption arc is mostly successful, even though I think they can be kind of hard to pull off.
And sometimes, like, pure punishment, so to speak, can be kind of unrealistic. And I think that what's often more realistic and interesting in stories is consequences, because there's lots of things that can go like punishment is very much a culture centric thing. You know, you go in, you get justice, you get it, you go through certain systems and it works and whatever, whereas consequences for your actions can be punishments, but it could also be, because I chose to do X, planet Y is now toast. And then having characters live with the consequences of their immoral decisions is often way more fun to play with, and gives the other characters stuff to bounce off of, or even moments for other characters with conflicting morals to have moments of, oh, I get it. Oh, that kind of sucks. Or more of a reap what you sow.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like when you see somebody and they did something for reason X, but like reason Y happens instead, then they're like, oh, that was not something that was on my radar at all. Then you can start getting that sympathy, like, oh, I get it now. Like, I was thinking all along that I was doing something for this cause, but the effects that's having on the side are a little too much for me. They kind of blindsided me. I think that's so interesting.
Such devastation was not my intent.
Yeah, basically, I also think that if you deal with consequences and the character is supposed to go on a redemption arc, having them like face consequences that actually like gets them right in the heart, something that was important to them, and it goes like horribly wrong because of their actions. I think that is like such a strong trigger to basically go on this redemption arc and try to change, because it's something like so vital for the character, that just like something devastating that went wrong, so you can then like destroy and rebuild, so to speak.
Yeah, I love doing that, and that's one of the areas that I like playing with in Cape Blast too. Is you have a bunch of different antagonists and villains with very different ideas of where they want the end game to go. So then that gives a ton of room to play with for characters that were part of that group moving forward, and then went, oh wait, the group's gone a different way and I don't like this anymore. It's those moments of clarity are very emotional and impacting moments in storytelling. So definitely don't shy away from that.
Yeah, I also feel in that regard it can be super interesting, because I kind of like stories where you have like an antagonistic force that is basically doing the right thing, but maybe through the wrong means. So when you then combine that with like the thing that they were trying or the means that they were using blowing up in their face, you can really work with that. And also I really like to kind of try to interlink how they can be on the one hand doing the right thing but still like fail miserably on the like moral scale, and how do you redeem that, and how do you like kind of play with the readers by having like the setup where basically what they're doing is right but the means are just completely wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And like that's something that's explored a lot, like to circle back on the earlier Batman reference, because Batman like is a great comic about morality in almost every single arc. Just because of who Bruce Wayne is. He's a billionaire. He does billionaire things that aren't great. And it's arguable that his some of the things that he has done for Wayne Corporation definitely had a negative impact on Gotham itself. And especially a lot of, more the one-shot stories explore that a lot too. And there's a ton of other webcomics and things like that that dive into that. And never be afraid to like put like your hero through a more scrutiny lens, and hold that mirror up and be like, are you sure this is what you want to make?
Yeah, I really love a like the ends justify the means sort of approach. Like you see a lot of
Yeah.
characters who get into this kind of mindset where, oh, I need to do this thing. It's really important for me to do this thing. I can't care about all the little things that are happening in it. It's usually that contrast between my big grandiose goal and like something small, like a kid who is now lost because they lost their parents now because of something that you did, and just balancing those larger moments with the small moments. Like how many small moments are going to add up to a large moment for you? What makes the balance shift for you when all of a sudden like the things that you're doing are just a little too far gone from your original goals? I just watched RRR on Netflix, which is a fantastic movie. I love it so much. But you have the two main protagonists. There's like just this one guy who is very, the ends justify the means. He has this very strict adherence, and he's doing very despicable things, even things that the villains of the story are just like, wow man, that's a little intense. Oh my god, you're a little scary to me. But he you can tell there's a drive behind it. You could tell he wants something really really bad, and he's willing to do a whole lot of bad stuff before one person comes into his life and says, you know what, there's people here, there's things that you've forgotten about, that you've lost your way, and I'm here to remind you about those, and you're gonna punish me, and you're gonna like you're gonna try to justify your worldview by silencing me, but you can't silence me. And in some ways I have actually touched your heart and made you better for it. Like that's how you get this like really powerful redemption arc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
That's exactly it. Like you have this, as you said, like this tipping scale, like how much is too much and when does the character realize. And I really like that, but I sometimes also am okay with like a character not being redeemable or staying completely unredeemable. Like one of my favorite villains ever is Claudia Wolf from Silent Hill 3. And she does like some horrendous things for a cause that is just in her head, basically to create a paradise where everyone is happy. And what I like so much about a character like Claudia is that she knows 100% that she is doing terrible things. She knows that she is not going to like enter that paradise that she wants to create because she is a bad person. But she's basically willing to sacrifice that and become someone who is so terrible so everyone else can be happy. And I mean, she's also like kind of like religiously fanatic, and the story is not quite as she thinks the story is. But I also think that characters like these can be really interesting because it can be so tragic to see that they had like a cause that was just to them and you can understand their cause, but they are basically so set into their tracks that they just steamroll into tragedy.
Yeah, if you're going for a tragic story, that can be like just a very effective way to just show and opportunity again, where people have the ability to either walk away from what they're doing or double down, and they keep doubling down and they keep doing worse things and they keep going down this path because they see no other alternative. And it really kind of accentuates to me the theme of like, you need to be flexible. You need to understand that morality does not exist in a vacuum, and there are nuances that you need to consider. And if you don't, this is what happens. This is what happens to you. You are going down this path that you can never return from. And that's really sad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so fun to play with the points of no return because like those are very dramatic moments that have a lot of punch when they have the thought put into them and the correct setup. I do see one of the problems that I see with that in a lot of media is when they try and hit that point of no return a little too early. And I know that a lot of the intention behind that is because they don't want. I know a lot of writers have said that, that, oh, well, I don't want to have to worry about, readers thinking that this character's morals are mine. So I'm going to have them go off the deep end early so that we can really pick on them. And I feel like if you're writing that way, you're going to sell yourself short on the full potential that the story can have.
To be honest, it can be so hard sometimes to like just sit with these things, especially when you like publish a webcomic and you get like reader feedback and you get these kinds of feedbacks that readers might be concerned about the course a character is taking, or that you might endorse or what the character is doing there. Like, I had a scene in Heirs of the Veil where Cortez basically like misuses his power of authority, and got a few comments where people were kind of like had problems with it because they were, in my opinion, justifiable, thinking of stuff like misusing your power in like a police context and police brutality. And for me, it was like, it was never meant to be a scene where he was supposed to be in the right, but the scene is also not like concluded in a way where they talk about him being in the wrong or whatever. So I then had to sit with it like for months to give the conclusion and show like the characters in a struggle and turmoil with what he has done. And sometimes, like, especially publishing in that format, it can make it really hard to not immediately like panic and go like, oh fuck, people now hate that character because he did something immoral, I have to rectify this somehow. Or, oh no, people now think I align myself with the horrible action of that character, I have to make them extra bad now so people don't think like I'm trying to be nuanced. No, people don't think I'm actually like condoning these horrible actions.
It's the classic, just hold on a minute, it's coming out next chapter. Except in webcomic time, next chapter is in like 8 months, and by then it's like, uh-oh.
It's so true. It's terrible. And like, do you ever get the like impulse to like go into your comment section and like argue with people like, wait, you're not, blah, 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 blah. I think that probably makes it worse, but I always have that impulse.
100% every single time. Arguing with your commenters in the comments always
Don't
makes
do
things
it.
worse. Never do it. Top tip.
I
Don't
mean,
do
I
it.
did that like with the person, especially who did the police brutality comment. I actually talked with that person, and we had like a really nice conversation about that. So I think that was, yeah, I think
That's
that was
really
the one
good.
time where I would say, okay, it was good that I talked with them. The one time, yeah.
Yeah, I do think if people are getting like escalating arguments in your comment section, you might want to cool it down. You might want to say, okay, these are all really good points. There's definitely more to this character coming up, so just hold on. I guess that would be my advice for that. If people are getting really, because people can get very argumentative in your comment sections when you're presenting kind of a morally gray character, and somebody's like, well, they're doing the complete logical thing, and somebody's like, well, no, but they're assholes. It's like, no, there's a balance here. Please wait it out.
Yeah. And I think this does bring us sort of into our last question, where it's, what is your advice to people who are looking for ways to shift their characters around morally, and how to keep that impact?
Oh gosh. Well, Finn brought up a great point of what not to do, and that's to give your character a tragic backstory that's their excuse for all of the horrible things that they've done. Like, don't do that. Because, like, even if something bad happened to you in the past, you're never going to like be able to shift people away unless they're doing something in the present that acknowledges and makes up for in some way. And this is a very broad way. There's a lot of different ways you can make up for the immoral actions of that a character has done in the past. But like that's one of the things that like just giving them a tragic backstory isn't enough. And I think a lot of comic artists lean on that early and hard, and it's just not, it doesn't work out the same way to a reader, and that can keep them very unsympathetic. Another tip I've seen is, if the character is not your focal character, if they're not the viewpoint character, make them the viewpoint character for a little bit and show their thought process, show what they're going through, show the other things that maybe the other characters don't see. Because bringing somebody into a third person omniscient or first person view can actually increase reader sympathy a lot, even if they're still doing terrible things, even if they're doing the exact same things. Knowing the why can really help with making an unsympathetic character more sympathetic. And if you're going the opposite way, just do the opposite thing. Just zoom out of their head, zoom into the consequences that they're having in the world around them, and how other people are viewing them, and why they're so blind in their own little path that they're not seeing the outside world around them and how it's changing based on their actions. That can reduce the sympathy and kind of make them slide a little further down the immoral scale, even if they're doing the exact same things.
Yeah, I would also absolutely say, like, take your time. Just allow yourself the time to have the character change gradually. Like, no matter in which direction you want to change them, take your time, show it like piece by piece, give a little bit of the reasoning why they are changing now. Because a lot of the times I think, like, changes in character moralities like fall flat for me because it is too sudden. Like, there is like one scene, one very impactful thing, and the character is suddenly like a changed person. And a lot of the times that doesn't work for me. And even if it's like something really big and impactful, the character should still like be allowed the time to unpack what they have done, to struggle, to maybe sometimes fall back into old habits and then get back out of it, because it makes for like a little bit more interesting storytelling, but also it makes it more believable for the reader to really see how the character is changing.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember too that morality is relative. It's contextual to the setting, it's contextual to the other characters, it's contextual to the theme. And I think what a lot of people struggle with is they try to make it all fit within the character, what the character does or doesn't do, or how the character acts. And morality is necessarily a thing that affects other people and other things in the setting. So if you're zoomed too far in and really only looking to change the way that a character is moral by changing what that character does or doesn't do, I don't think that's usually enough. I think you do need reactions from other people and consequences and all those good things, those external things that will show the reader this was a good idea or this was a bad idea.
Yeah, I also think like another thing is, don't be scared to not have your characters actions always ally with your own morality. I sometimes see that people have this like style of writing where they really want the character to feel good and be a good person, and a lot of the times that can make for a weaker story. So don't be afraid to have like the character do things that you would normally not do, or that you would consider immoral if it fits your story and if it makes the plot work better, make it more interesting. Because this is particularly something that I have struggled with, that people will read my stories and think, oh, you have this thing in that story or you have that thing in that story. That means you condone it. That means you're a bad person. So I kind of constricted myself like a lot by just being like, okay, how do I make the character look like a nice person? And I noticed it just makes for pretty boring writing, and you kind of have to sometimes deal with the fact that maybe readers might get upset with the characters, but remember, they're not upset at you. You are basically doing your job and you're doing it good.
100%, yeah. It's such an issue all across writing where you get these characters that are just nothing, where it's this perfect character, nothing bad happens to them, they don't do anything bad, everything's perfect. And those characters are just boring, because a lot of the best writing and best moments in stories comes from those moments of conflict, the moments of self-reflection where you go, is this really the right thing to do? Or, oh no, this thing that I did had these consequences. How do I live with this? Or how do I move forward? And that's just good writing, where it gives you more flexibility with your characters, makes the scenes just more interesting to read. It's just, when you're making characters, just remember, Po Buddy's nerfect.
Po Buddy's nerfect. I think too, like, if you can, if you really want somebody who really focuses on their morals, and they're like a really good person, and they always do the thing, like, pile on the external conflict, pile on the things where like there wasn't anything they did wrong, but like the world was just wronger. And like they
Right? Oh, I love those stories. I'm a sucker for that.
Like, I think that's an important aspect of morality in real life too. Like, you can do everything right and people still won't like you. People still won't, like, it won't go over perfectly, because there is no perfect action. And the more that you can illustrate that in your writing, the realer those characters will feel, as opposed to kind of this cardboard cutout, like, oh, here's a hero, here's Superman, he punched the villain and nothing bad ever happened ever again. Like, no, that's not the way the world works. We all know that, and we need to.
We all know that Superman had a fascist arc.
I didn't know that until just now. Thank you for that. Superman is canceled.
Yep, there was an arc. There was an arc.
Yeah, but yeah, like, we all know that the world's kind of sucks sometimes, and that's part of life, and I think that makes your characters that much more lifelike.
That reminds me of my favorite Star Trek Next Generation quote, and it's arguably one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek ever. And it summed up where Picard is talking about, they're trying, the crew of the Enterprise is just trying, and they're doing all the things, and this it's still not working. Nothing's going right. And Picard says, you can do everything right and still lose. That's life. And I think that's such an important thing to carry with you, both in real life and when you're writing.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think that brings us to the end of this episode. I think that's a bacon cheddar wrap. I've been Rennie. You can read my work at katesblast.com.
And I've been Delphina. You can read my comic Somnolus at somnolus.com.
I've been Finn, and you can read my comic at heirsofttheveil.com. And now let's go and commit some crimes or something.
Murder!
Be a mole.
Yeah. You can't do crime.
Thanks for listening to Screen Tones. Subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts to be notified of new episodes. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at ScreenTonesCast.